2 hours later.
Ships is us.
Later, in the void.
Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth is, wait for this mouthful, a first-person shooter survival horror adventure game developed by Headfirst Productions, released in 2005 to the PC and Xbox audiences. This is the only real production credit to Headfirst Productions because shortly after the release of Dark Corners of the Earth, the company folded due to financial woes and the inability to find another publisher, which will be of course slightly related to the game we're going to be looking at today. In the game, you play the role of Jack Walters, a private investigator who's down on his luck due to not really finding any leads or cases to follow until he's summoned to settle the dispute between the police and a cult by the name of the Fellowship of Yith, who interestingly enough specifically asked for Jack to come to the mansion. Inside the mansion, the game opens up a little bit to let you explore the area, to which Jack can grab documents, comment on objects and pictures, and generally investigate the dark dealings of this cult. As it becomes immediately obvious from when you enter the mansion, a great many of the cultists kill themselves in ritual suicide and others through the firefight with the police. Eventually, you make your way to the basement, where you end up finding an awfully goopy and eldritch contraption that, as far as you're concerned, is not any technology from the 1910s, let alone from humanity itself. You try to get the contraption working, which seems to be fueled by the man eviscerated and hooked up to the contraption, being kept alive by having his separate body parts in different containers while still functioning. After you turn on this bad boy, all hell breaks loose and an otherworldly portal opens up and an eldritch-looking figure spawns from the gate. Shortly after, Jack passes out and is picked up by the police, who describe him saying utterly alien and unintelligible nonsense that chilled many officers to the bone. After 6 grueling years in the asylum, Jack gets released for eventually coming to his senses and being a normal person again, now in February of 1922. Only problem is that Jack doesn't remember 6 years at all. For him, it was only a short 5 months. But it wasn't long till Jack found some investigative work in finding a missing person in the decrepit, xenophobic coastal town of Innsmouth, on the look for Brian Burnham, a clerk sent by the First National grocery chain to establish a local store within Innsmouth. It's in the arrival to Innsmouth that we get a muddy picture of what's going on in town. Random folk give him shifty eyes, dodge questions regarding the disappearance of Burnham or the local religion that has usurped the local Masonic hall, known as the Esoteric Order of Dagon. From the get-go in Innsmouth, we can feel that something isn't quite right, and it's up to us to slowly unravel the mystery here. But the hostile nature of the town and the more unknown influences are there to stop you from figuring out the truth. So wherever we go in Innsmouth, we must watch where we step. To start this aside, I really do want to make the case that for a lot of the games I'm going to mention or describe, that I really do genuinely enjoy them. But when it comes to being a quote-unquote Lovecraftian experience, they tend to all miss the mark in very significant ways. See, a lot of the games like to put out the idea that it must be Lovecraftian and has some sort of sanity meter mechanic or a bunch of eldritch goopy monsters to face. And while those are elements of Lovecraftian horror, they miss the point in some aspects. One of the most common choices that tends to detract from the idea of horror is the base fact that some of the goopy monsters that you can fight in these games are even fightable in the first place. Take one of my favorite games in this genre, Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, for instance. In the game, you end up fighting legions of bad guys and monsters to stop one of the eldritch gods, and in the end, the feeling of hopelessness is lost. Sure, you get a really well done sanity mechanic that plays really well on a classic TV. It makes you question if your family or friends are messing with you by playing around with the TV settings or if the game is truly driving you insane. But the fact that through human might and some spell dickery you can get a decent ending is kinda counterproductive to the sort of tale we want in a Lovecraftian experience. In too many of the games out there that deal with this sort of madness, the overall population or society at large and the player are all too quick to either accept or help the character out in their journey. These games are supposed to make you feel weak and powerless in both modern day society and wherever or whenever the player goes to. For instance, if the player character went up to a random person on the street or even someone that they knew and just let out their tales of combating ancient evils and eldritch societies, those people would think that the player character is mad. And that's supposed to transfer over to the player character and make them feel powerless. Have these people that the character has grown to take comfort in, knowing that they'll help them out and stop all contact with them, or even hand them over to the authorities saying that they've gone insane. That idea of helplessness is then compounded when you end up actually dealing with the eldritch, and you will truly feel helpless because at that moment, when dark powers and esoteric societies are on your tail constantly scheming your demise, and you know within your head that if you fail then it's game over for humanity, you'll go into despair at the thought that nobody, not your friends, your family, the government, will help you in your plight. The game's finest moment is the entire first sequence when you arrive in Innsmouth and you start looking around town for clues about Burnham and his whereabouts. All the meanwhile getting the stink eye from these fish-faced bastards around town. It's in these moments that you feel that oppressive isolation that I'm talking about because you know that the entire town from the moment you stepped into Innsmouth is out to get you. At first with their rude demeanor and dodging questions to eventually being more openly hostile towards you. It's at this point in the game where the esoteric Order of Dagon is introduced and you find out that the Order practically has total control of Innsmouth, not to mention that nearly everyone in town is part of the cult. It also doesn't help that the people that aren't hostile towards you are social outcasts themselves or drunk pissants in the street who hold no real power over Innsmouth, making their help at best useless and at the worst compounding your own despair when even the people of this town have no power over it. Not long after arriving in Innsmouth, you try to retire to your room at the Gilman Hotel, only to be rudely interrupted by one of those pesky culty assassination attempts. In this iconic sequence, you have to viciously run away from your attackers by going through half of the hotel and later the surrounding buildings, all the meanwhile using everything in your path to stop them, from locking the bolts on doors to moving furniture to halt their advance. It's at this point where the game goes from a less passive experience into a more active stealth experience where you have to evade the Order's goons from finding you and gutting you like a fish. Yeah, did I kind of forget to mention that this game sort of runs like ass? Even with the unofficial patch applied to the game, there are still a slew of bugs out there, ranging from cutscenes not loading, the background music just stopping, typical crashes to desktop, and the game's frame rate being too fast to outrun a Shogoth. But the issues don't just stop at the bugs, as they end up permeating into the gameplay itself, primarily within the stealth mechanics and the shooting mechanics, of which I'll touch up on the shooting mechanics later. To start off, the stealth mechanics just don't work. You never quite know how visible you are to your enemies, what their cone of vision is, or how far till they can't detect you anymore. Coupled with the fact that enemies respawn constantly to an annoying degree, and you're not always going to be in combat, but it sure is going to feel that way by the end of it. And the thing that really compounds the issue is that this is the part of the game where stealth and investigation is the forefront of the gameplay. Any sort of combat that you get in with the cultists can certainly be a death wish if there's more than a few people or if you got some wounds on you already. So basically, in Dark Corners of the Earth, you have a healing and wound system where you have a variety of materials like bandages, alcohol, and stitching to heal specific parts of your body. Depending on where you got hit, it might mean that you have to stitch up your eyes, rub an alcohol solution in your eyes, bandage up your right eye, or do something with that big gaping hole in your chest. All of which ends up causing an animation in-game to show Jack fixing himself. Now the game has a few ways of telling you how damaged you are. You might see a green effect on your screen if you've been gassed, the screen starts to lose color and get blurry if you're bleeding out, and the screen goes awry if you're starting to feel the effects of insanity. Sometimes while in combat, you won't exactly notice how damaged you are until the screen is basically in grayscale and you're almost done bleeding out. And at that point, it's pretty much all over for you because the only way to heal yourself is to go into the menu and do the animation. And if you're in the middle of a fight, you can start to see why this might become a huge glaring issue. So to keep going on with the story, eventually there's a point in the game where you end up picking up a weapon that isn't just a knife, and from here on out the game slowly but surely loses sight of the original picture, and became the thing that should not be. But as far as the game is concerned, you're still mostly evading patrols and searching for the whereabouts of Burnham. Eventually you'll end up at Thomas Waite's house, who is the owner of a variety store in Innsmouth that rumor has it contains a special artifact that could be used against the Order of Dagon. Entering the house, you are introduced by Ramona Waite, Thomas's 10-year-old daughter, who's the hybrid between a human and a fish-like race called the Deep Ones, who make up the majority of the people of Innsmouth. Ramona tells you that Thomas is away at work in the store, so it luckily gives you some much-needed time to go and take a look around the house, to which you'll eventually find a diary with a combination to the safe in the variety store that has this so-called artifact. Lastly, in the final room of the household, you attempt to open a door, but the Deep One behind it, supposedly Ramona's mother, storms out and eviscerates Ramona down the stairs, causing you to pass out for the time being from the sheer shock of the event. Eventually, when you come home, you notice Thomas Waite at the bottom of the stairs, grieving for the death of his daughter. You offer your apologies and he gives you the key to the back of a store to take the object out of town. You end up making it to the store to find Ruth Billiam, Burnham's girlfriend, looking for the object, to which you quickly shoo her away to go find safety, only so you can go and grab the object yourself. You open up the safe and figure out that the object within it is the Book of Dagon, a manuscript created by Obed Marsh that deals with the Deep Ones, Dagon, Hydra, and the titular Cthulhu. After you pick up the Eldritch Tome, you go to prison with haste to go and release Burnham, where the Order has him imprisoned for interfering with their affairs, and quickly release him so he can get a getaway car all fixed up. You also unfortunately come across the body of Thomas Waite, who ended up slitting his throat open in grief of his daughter dying, something that will start to haunt Jack in no time. Soon, Burnham and friends fix up the truck and make a getaway from Innsmouth that starts this long, drawn-out chase sequence through town, where it is up to Jack to stop all the cultists from killing you. Without a doubt, one of the largest downfalls to Dark Corners of the Earth is its near abysmal combat, and that is of course for several reasons. Those being that the combat is trash, takes away from other elements of the gameplay, and worst of all, does not belong in this game in the slightest. Now the final element I'll be talking about later in the video when we come to a specific event, but for now let's talk about how the combat mechanics don't really work and detract from other aspects of the game. But to be fair, some of these detractions come from genuinely interesting and at that point in time, innovative techniques when it comes to gameplay. For instance, the entire game you don't have a HUD or heads-up display, so there's no markers on your screen telling you where to go, where you're aiming your gun, no hit markers to show whether you hit an enemy, and no ammunition counters on your weapon, so you have to count every shot. Other mechanics that they throw in the game to spice things up is the manual reload for all your firearms. Basically meaning when you run through an entire magazine or the cylinder in a revolver, if you attempt to shoot off another shot, then it'll just give you the classic click. Seeing a stealth or horror-oriented game like some of my favorites in Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, and Metro, it works out really well, because for the most part you kinda wanna shy away from combat when you can, and when combat does occur, it's short, brutish, and intense. It's in these moments when a little bit of spice comes in real handy, because when you're spooked for your life, mutants are beaming down on you in the distance, you unload on them, and you hear that signature click 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 that you've malfunctioned or ran out of ammo. That's when the real terror kicks in. And in games like Stalker and Metro, it's an element of the gameplay that heightens the atmosphere of the situation, because nearly everything is a danger to you, whether it is from the environment, the fauna, or even other fellow stalkers. The thing that makes everything from the mutants, the dangers of the zone, and even other human beings so spookingly, spooky in Stalker and Metro is because in those games, those elements are not pushovers and really should be treated as equals, if not better than the player at all times. Each encounter in Stalker is one you have to treat with the utmost importance and care, because if you don't, that's a surefire way to end up dead, becoming another nameless stalker who gets whispered in the bonfires, wondering whatever happened to you, only for one of the other stalkers to say, who knows, lost to the zone, I guess. But in Dark Corners of the Earth, everything is a goddamn joke, and by the time we get to this getaway sequence from Innsmouth, you're given to the keys to the kingdom and wiping out the goons of the Order of Dagon. In this sequence alone, you'll probably end up wiping about a few dozen of them as Burnham tries to drive the car away from town. In this sequence, expect to die way too many goddamn times, not because the game is particularly difficult, but because these mechanics break all the flow of combat and put you in unnecessary risk. The chase itself is designed as a long sequence where you're in the back of the truck shooting at literally everyone behind you, and for the entire time, the combat never lets up. Now this wouldn't be an issue in a normal shooter if you knew how much health and ammunition you had, but you don't. So frequently you'll end up dying because you didn't even know you were particularly damaged, or in the midst of all that chaos not even shooting anything because your weapon ran out of ammo. But to be fair, the gripes mostly stem from the innovative but incredibly annoying healing system for Dark Corners of the Earth. Every time you get to patch up one of your eyes and heal yourself, you have to stop everything, pull up the menu, start the animation for Jack to heal himself, but the issue is that everything is still going on in reality. So you might be patching yourself up, but some cultist ends up hitting you in the head anyway, so you're dead. And that's where 90% of all the dying comes from in this segment, and while I don't usually become flustered while playing games, this segment that I can genuinely say is absolute nonsense and should have never gone through quality assurance. Through all of my forays into the Cthulhu mythos, whether that be through video games, tabletop role-playing games, books, cinema, or music, I learned one thing that is certain, and that is you do not mess or confront with the damn baddies of the mythos. Whether it be Lovecraft's own books or the rules regarding eldritch beings in the wonderful Call of Cthulhu tabletop game by Chaosium, you're not supposed to directly confront most, if not any of these monsters in direct combat, as it's surely a death sentence. Some of these baddies have no form or flow in and out of time and space, and having to witness these awful beings should be so horrendously insanity inducing that it would just drive you nuts from looking at them. First of all, fellas, let's just take a step back and look at the absurdity of what's transpiring on screen. You're in an old-timey truck escaping Innsmouth, and somehow you got an arsenal of weapons to fight your way out. Secondly, you seem to be fighting the entire damn town, because at the end of this sequence you probably wiped out more of the Deep One hybrid population faster than mass fishing. You genuinely end up shooting dozens and dozens of villagers, and somehow this doesn't affect Jack at all. He's just okay with the wanton slaughter of some people, or, fish people, I guess. All the while you're dealing with the other issues, like the numerous design choices and the gameplay issues, this sequence amounts to not a lot of fun in my books, and it's from here where the game starts to head off the cliff. But to get back on track with the plot of this completely wacko game, after the chase sequence, you crash your truck and Burnham ends up dying, only for Jack to be picked up by a mysterious individual. This individual of all people turns out to be J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, tasked with investigating the conspiracy surrounding Innsmouth and the family that runs the show, the Marsh Dynasty. Turns out the FBI is dubious of all the off-colored gold the Marshes have and try to figure out where the hell it's coming from. And instead of asking you to go home and take it easy from all the nonsense you just experienced, they give you even more guns and tell you to help them storm the refinery. To sum up this section, it's pretty boring, mostly just going around in circles and shooting all the respawning cultists until you come face to face with the Mythos iconic Shoggoth. And for those in my wonderful audience that don't know what a Shoggoth is, get out. Okay, alright. A Shoggoth is a monster from the mythos that's described as a nondescript mass of goop, mouths, and eyeballs that form and deform at will. You will also note that the Shoggoth's goop is also incredibly acidic, so be careful not to step in it. Yeah, for once this game actually does something rather interesting and gives you this mythos baddie and tells you to complete a series of puzzles to stave it away for a few moments so you can get away, almost like an actual encounter with a mythos monster. In this sequence you have to look for some fuses and various other objects while evading the Shoggoth so you can turn on the electrical equipment and give him a good old zap, which should make the goopy being retreat and allow Jack to escape. After dodging the Shoggoth and narrowly escaping it in a chase sequence, you find the otherworldly origin of the off-colored Innsmouth gold. Turns out that this gold doesn't come from Innsmouth or anywhere else in New England, at least on the surface, because this infamous gold doesn't come from man. It comes from the Deep One city of Yanithle. Yeah, there we go. Deep under the sea in a direct trade with the Order of Dagon, which means that the Order and everyone with it is complicit in the largest money laundering scheme at that point in the United States. So instead of just another FBI-led raid into the Order's headquarters, Hoover leads an entire armed expedition by the United States Marines on Innsmouth to capture the marshes. And the scale of this operation is going to seem ludicrous, and for two different reasons. First one being that the amount of soldiers in this operation, they're going to come in handy because you're going to be beset by everybody. And that's including the Deep One inhabitants as well. But the other reason why this seems rather ridiculous, and really the primary one, is because to the scale of what a proper Lovecraftian tale should be, we've gone off the rails. We've completely dropped off the cliff, gone into the deep end, and right into some primordial abyss, and we have no hope of retreating back to normalcy. In these stories, the world at large shouldn't be aware of these eldritch elements that walk among us, forever being ignorant to the real state of affairs with the world. But not in Dark Corners of the Earth, because we suddenly jumped into a war movie with several US government entities now waging a goddamn siege on Innsmouth. The fact that so many people had to experience this event, whether it be the FBI, the US Marines, or the Navy as we'll soon see, should be telling to the US government and the world at large, exposing this dark curtain cast on the world and releasing eldritch horrors to the public eye. Thing is that this does a disservice to what happens to Jack at the end of the game, as with almost all of these stories, the protagonist should be admitted into an asylum for the things that he had to experience. But the thing is, logically speaking, we shouldn't get that, since at least the government entities that we have been dealing with would know that the mad ravings of a lunatic are real, because they all saw it. Though of course, from Jack's perspective, the conspiracy runs deeper than that, so on his own he would go about and try to sneak his way into the esoteric Order of Dagon, which from the context of what happened, makes much more sense and feels more right than a full-scale Marine siege of the town. But that's what could have been, so we'll continue with what we got. Eventually, he'd try to make it into the headquarters of the Order and dick around, reading various pieces of lore and trying to find a way to bring down the barrier surrounding the Order's hall so the FBI and the military can storm it and grab the marshes. In doing so, you eventually head down into the cellar, where the temple to the various gods of the Order are, those being Father Dagon, Mother Hydra, and Cthulhu, the Great Old One. It's here that you meet with the Deep One hybrid sorcerers that shoot some sort of magic energy your way. While this doesn't even hold a candle to some of the worst that is yet to come, it's just another example of we're not even close to what a faithful Lovecraftian experience is supposed to be. But regardless, we gotta move on and uncover this conspiracy. After fighting the fish druids, you find Sebastian Marsh, who's running away from your super deadly weapons, and you begin to give chase, only to fall through some poorly constructed floorboards and somehow find yourself in the ocean? Soon after, you're picked up from the cold-ass ocean by the US Coast Guard cutter Urania, or whatever works for you, and you try to get some rest to help stave off the incoming insanity. Unfortunately for Jack, his rest is soon interrupted by an attack orchestrated by the Deep Ones, who understandably have a death wish on him as he's rapidly encroaching the bottom of this conspiracy, which is coincidentally where we'll reach rock bottom for Dark Corners of the Earth. The fish-faced fiends soon overrun the vessel and most of the ship is lost, and the captain ends up committing suicide after witnessing the carnage. Meanwhile, Jack heads up deck, comes face to face with Father Dagon himself, and the only way to get past this baddie is to shoot him in the face with a goddamn navel gun. This is, in my opinion, where we hit absolute rock bottom with Dark Corners of the Earth. It doesn't get any worse than this, and the rest of the game is basically what can be described as meandering through rock bottom, looking for any sort of light left in the game, but unfortunately, there isn't anymore. What we're just experiencing with fighting Dagon and eventually beating him is the complete antithesis of what a Lovecraftian experience should be like. We should barely be able to look at these damn things without going mad, but here we are beating it with conventional means, no less. Like, it just boggles my damn mind. This is the exact opposite of what we should be doing, but of course here we are, just doing it and giving ourselves a pat on the back when he gets defeated, like nothing happens. To further explain to some of you who are not familiar with H.P. Horsauce and his ideas regarding humanity and cosmic horror, he basically believes that there are entities in the world that are so impossibly grander than us that it is hard to understand on a human scale. There are primordial elements that have outlived humanity by billions of years, coming from vast swaths of the stars that hold true dominion over the Earth, but for separate reasons are basically dormant. These elements, if they were ever to awaken, would essentially wipe out humanity with a snap of their fingers, taking their thrones as the true tyrants of the earth. And it's this realization that ultimately you, your life, everyone you know, and humanity as a whole means nothing in the grand scheme, as you're so insignificantly small to the affairs of the outer gods and great old ones that they would treat humanity no better than ants. But even the goons of these outer gods and great old ones are a formidable sight, living millions of years to become the true apex predators in their current age, detached from human affairs but masters in magic artistry like Deep Ones and Father Dagon. That is, until you kill it by shooting it in the face. Jack, being washed ashore into Devil's Reef, finds his way into the Deep One city of Yanatley, gets captured only to see one of the marshes kill the other marsh, only for you to get the jump on the elder marsh and kill his stupid fish-faced, face. From here on, we're on a quest to basically get the portal in Yanatley working to get back to the headquarters in Innsmouth. Issue is that it's being magically jammed by Mother Hydra herself, so you have to reach the temple and stop her. Thing is that this temple also has a barrier on it like the one in Innsmouth, so you're going to have to go underground to find a way to circumnavigate the city to get the Hydra's temple. To do this, you have to go to the rumored underground prison and then from there head on to the temple. At the entrance of this prison where the Deep Ones fear, you pick up nothing less but a Yithian lightning gun. And moments later you're fighting the flying polyps that wiped out the Yithians on Earth. Man, at this point you don't even care anymore. So basically Jack ends up becoming the character I always play in Eldritch Horror that has a Yithian lightning gun and can teleport from place to place. After fighting the polyps, you make it to Hydra's sanctum, and like her fish-faced sugar daddy, you end up killing her as well, and get thrown into another goddamn chase sequence out of the Deep One city. You leave the city and go through the portal, if it happens, because it always crashes for me at this point, where Mackie and Hoover are there to catch you and ask you what the hell happened, only to not believe you and throw you in the asylum for being a kook, even though they saw half the things that you just did. Hey, remember early on in the beginning of the game when we were dealing with that house and the cultists that worship the great race of Yith? Yeah, well after that you were sent to the asylum, right? And because you were crazy and you were saying goofy stuff, it turns out you were actually mind swapped with the Yithian for that duration. To explain, in the mythos, the great race of Yith is a race that travels through time and inhabits the minds of certain individuals, species, or entities. They're a scholarly race and they like to research a bunch of crap and figure out stuff about the universe and the various species of the universe. So in those 10 or 6 years or so, you were transported through time and inhabited the body of a Yithian, and probably studied some eldritch knowledge, so deep down you might have been familiar with some of the eldritch baddies that we had to face. This might go on to explain why a lot of the stuff that we experience in the game, Jack basically just kinda shrugs it off. But back in reality at the asylum, Jack is in his cell making some schizo drawings on the wall, and not long after being able to not really cope with the knowledge of what lurks in the dark corners of the earth, he ends up committing suicide and effectively ending this journey. Fellas, Dark Corners of the Earth is just a giant mess. It's got gameplay mechanics that don't tend to fit at all or even correlate with other elements well, and the narrative in this damn game just jumps the shark all over the place and all the time. It's so genuinely frustrating to talk about because you can see that a lot of passion went into this project. In some areas, they get how to tell a Lovecraftian story so well, but in some others, it just horrendously falls apart and you're left with a goddamn joke. If I had to take a wild guess, I would say that Dark Corners of the Earth was a product of corporate meddling. There's sections of the game at the start that reflect the original vision, but I feel at the first getaway sequence that some producers said it needs to be an action game cause a bunch of other shooters were coming out the same year. This simple change in direction not just alters the narrative in significantly awful ways, but as well the general feel and atmosphere of the game into something much, much worse. If you want to try out Dark Corners of the Earth, make sure you know what the hell you're getting into, and if you do, then this game might be a good exercise to point a finger at and go, hey, you see that? Don't do that. But I will say it's a genuine shame that Headfirst Interactive didn't go on to make the sequels that were planned. But when your first game is a financial failure and nobody wants to publish it, then that's what happens. So in the end, if you're looking to get into this piece of work, then just make sure you know what you're getting into, and how to fix the numerous amounts of bugs, and you should be fine. Yeah, kind of.